Thank you everybody for joining us. I'm very excited for this. This will be the first time I present a lot of these ideas, so hopefully it's fresh and interesting and new. So my name's Sean Ericson, Jacqueline Pham. We're very grateful that you guys invited us here at Yale. So we're gonna hopefully cover a couple of ideas of how we can structure concepts, thoughts of how we can make our tango journey quicker, more enjoyable, ideas for how we can practice and get the most out of our practice. So, a couple of things. Who is this for? So, like anybody who's interested in getting better at tango, right? Hopefully, there will be something useful for you. We're going to go over concepts that'll help you get the most out of your practice, get the most out of your training. And I think everybody has paper and pen available, and if not, it's okay. Okay, so we're going to start in kind of an interesting place. We're going to start thinking way back to in ancient Greece. So there's this legend of this guy named Milo of Britain. I don't know if I pronounced that correct, the place. But it's this legend of this ancient Greek wrestler, and he's going to be training for the Olympics, right? And so he wants to win the Olympics. So he comes up with a very novel way of training. He gets a calf, a newborn calf, puts it on his back, walks up and down a mountain nearby each day, right? So at first it's a small calf. He goes and does it. Each day, right, the calf's getting bigger, it's growing, but he's also getting stronger. So he does this once a day, every day, until by the end, he has a fully grown bull on his back, and he's carrying it up and down the mountain, he's yoked out of his gourd, he goes on and wins the Olympics, right? So that's kind of the legend. We're gonna take some truths behind this probably fictional story, but apply it, there's some nuggets of truth there to be gained. So how can we train like that? Well, there's a first one. Let's think about setting a goal, right? His goal is he's gonna get gold at the Olympics, right? So we can start thinking of, okay, what are our tango goals? Depending on what we really want, we are going to train differently, right? Success is not the same for everybody. So our training should not be the same for everybody. So this is our first step. You can't succeed if you don't know where you want to get. Okay, the second step is, right, we have to gather our resources. So, okay, what were Milo's resources? One cow, one mountain, boom, right?
Two legs.
But we have to think of what resources do we need to gather so that we can grow in tango, right? So often our will and desire is there, but there's an important piece missing. And instead of trying to crank and make it really hard for ourselves, we should spend the time to make sure we have the things we need, right? So that's the second one. The third one is, how often should we actually be training, right? His was one cow, one mountain, once per day, right? Rinse and repeat. But how often should we actually be practicing tango? Okay, it's a question that we don't actually often ask ourselves, right?
Yeah, and I would also, if I can interject really quickly, in addition to asking how often should we ask, I think an even more important question before that is, how often can we practice? Like, some of us are physically constrained by our lab work, by our thesis, by our qualifying exams, by our jobs in day-to-day life. So being real and being kind with ourselves about what time do I have available. I need to sleep, I need to eat. I also need to shower and pay the bills. And so being realistic about what time we have is also important.
And then the last one is this idea of how can we vary our difficulty, right? There's this concept called progressive overload, which is what the story kind of talks about, right? Where we start out with a small calf. As it gets bigger, Milo also gets stronger so that he's able to meet the increasing difficulty, right? But you can't start at expect yourself to overcome that, right? You need to start with the baby and grow into the bowl. You can't just be like, okay, well, let's see what happens here. Let's try the most crazy move in the Malanga and hope for the best, right? We need to be able to have a way that we can find the right difficulty for us at each time and move that along as we gain proficiency. So this is what we're going to talk about. So next slide. So first thing is a couple of insights of how can we set goals, okay? Well, one thing is I think there's not one type of goal, and this is totally, I'm sure people have better frameworks. This is the one that I think of. We have what I'll call abstract and concrete goals, right? And so an abstract goal maybe doesn't have a specific definition, but it's really what keeps us up night dreaming. You know, maybe our goal could be, I want to have a really comfortable embrace, right? Or maybe I want to be an amazing performer, right? There's some specificity there, but it's kind of this nebulous thing, but it's what we really want. And then a concrete goal could be like, okay, I want to keep my arms more still as I lead, right? That's very concrete. That's not going to be what's going to motivate us to get it, to practice every day, but it's something very specific that we can say, I did that better. So we want to have both abstract and concrete goals. And the way that I see it is you want to set kind of your abstract goals to tell you where you really want to be, and then you need to have concrete goals to actually get you there. So you kind of want to have both. And then the second thing is goals will have some time period, right? What do I want to get out of this practice today is a goal. What do I want to get out of this workshop this weekend, right? That's a very specific goal that you can set yourself. Another one, kind of this near term, okay, what am I doing for the next 3 months is a great period. 12-week cycles is somehow, our body's kind of set on that. So what do I want in the next 3 months is a great period. And then, this kind of long-term, where do I want to see myself in 5 years, right? That's, it would be hard maybe if any of you wanted to say, I want to perform in a festival, I want to be a traveling teacher. If that's your goal, it's going to be very hard to do that today. But all of you could do that in the next 3 years, right? That's an achievable goal in the next several years. You can set that, then you have to start thinking, how am I going to get there? But that kind of broad time period, be very unconstrained as you can, set what you really, really want. So next slide. We're going to start, take a second, or a couple minutes, really. Try to write down a couple of goals. Try to write down something that's maybe more near term, say the next 3 months, the next month, what you would like to improve, and something that's long term, what really inspires you. Tango, try to write down, pick an abstract goal, something like, I want to have a yummy embrace. I want to, everybody in New York to know about me. Whatever it is. And find a couple of concrete goals, 1 or 2, that would help you get there. So take a second to do that. So the next thing is we're going to, what I call, gather our resources. And I think of it like we have this toolkit. So here are how I, in my head, structure what we need. There's the things we need and the people we need, okay? And so the things we need, things like shoes, right? Or at least some way to pivot. Once you get something that you're having the right tool, it actually does make a difference. So that's something to just try to find. Finances. Tango in a university setting maybe doesn't cost as much money as out in the wild, but it's still not cheap. I remember when I first started dancing, I was an undergraduate, and I was like, I don't know how to pay for this, so I had to start a graded math tests, and all of that money just went into dance. So that was my solution here. But you can be honest with yourself of how much finances should I really be spending, or can I spend? How much do I need to spend? How can I make that work?
And there are strategies within the New York metro area for making Tango more accessible to everybody. So a lot of Yongas and practice spaces will exchange volunteering for access or entrance or admission to those. Also, a lot of organizers these days will do sliding scale for classes and for admission. So most places will have some sort of student or trainee discount. Don't be afraid to reach out to each other and to your local organizers and community organizers for help. We want to make Tango accessible for everyone.
Very true. Then, another thing, right? Hopefully, it sounds like you guys are able to have this, right? You guys have great organizers. I don't know, you probably know how lucky you are, but it's really wonderful to see. Find things like practice spaces and Malanga spaces. So that would be my list of things that are really important. And then my list of people that I would say are important to try to find a ways around not having would be a partner.
Or partners.
Exactly. Colleagues, people to practice with, people to share with, I think that's hugely important and kind of underutilized, right? So you have partners, you have colleagues, you have, find a teacher, and if you can, try to find kind of some guides and mentors. So there are things that oftentimes we might not have some of these things. And so you want to have a strategy of either obtaining it or working around it. So I would say the most common thing on this list that people don't have is a partner, right? It's funny that, if somebody doesn't dance tango, the one thing they know is it takes two to tango. And the one thing most of us doesn't have is a partner, right? This is just what people think versus reality. It's the biggest difference you can find in tango is that so many people don't have a partner. Interestingly, it can be easier to have 5 partners than 1 partner, right? Where if you try to have one partner who you're going to train with and do all this stuff, that's a lot of commitment. Whereas if you have a couple of friends who are we're going to go to the practica together, can we dance 2 tandas and try out a move? Commit ahead of time that we're going to practice something, right? That's a practice partner, even though it's maybe not your sole life and tango and performance and everything in the world partner, right? You can find having different practice partners that you can actually practice with. So, these things are stuff that maybe you don't have, but you can start to think, oh, I don't have this. I need to have a way around it. Instead of just being I don't have it, I guess I'm not going to grow, right? This is the stuff that, take a second and go, do I have all of these pieces? If not, that's okay, but how can I still grow? How can I be strategic about getting what I need when I'm missing one of these? So, next slide. What? Oh, sorry, yes. I thought it was on the next slide. Take a minute, write down, are there any of these that you feel like you currently don't have? And what are steps that you could either take to get them or take to, in aggregate, get them? So, if you don't have colleagues, right, maybe write learn how to find friends. Or,
If we have a lecture of that.
If I learn how to do it, I'll tell you. But you get the idea, right? Write down if you're missing any of these. Okay, what are steps that you could take so that you feel okay, I still have everything I need to grow. Okay, so coming back, so we have set our goal. We're now gathering our resources. Here's my my idea of how we can think about the different ways we spend our time in tango. And it's this idea of tango's kind of like having a meal, where there's actually these distinct categories, right? So one is going to be, we're going to call it the shopping category. And that's where you go gather your ingredients. I'm trying to cook something, I need to first gather my ingredients, and then I actually need to spend time in the kitchen, right? I need to prepare my meal. And then once I have that, then I can go enjoy my food, all right? So you're gathering your ingredients, so you have your shop, you prepare them, you cook, and then you enjoy them. So how does this apply to Tango? Well, these would be my categories. Something like what we're doing right now, this is gathering ingredients. You're doing a lot of shopping this weekend, right? Taking classes and workshops, private lessons. You know, if you're sitting and you're watching, you know, whichever the next Jonathan and Clarissa video that drops, like that's, you know, you're studying up the dance. You know, if you're spending late nights discussing how to do some move, right? That's all like getting information in, right? So that's a critical part. The next is preparing your meals. So you're cooking. This is going to be solo practice. This is going to be partner practice, group practice. You know, if you're cross-training, that's conditioning. This is all the stuff of you're taking that information and you are translating it into capabilities. So instead of it just being in your head, it is now in your movements in your body. That's that kind, right? This is taking, you know, from the raw ingredients to a food that you can actually enjoy. And then things like milongas, marathons and festivals, social gatherings, performances, whether you watch them or whether you are doing them, that's kind of the end states. That's the eating. Right, so just like food, we can start to see if you don't have a good balance, you can start to run into problems, right? Like, you know, we could go out shopping and we could eat a lunch, but if we don't have any time cooking, then the only things we can buy are super prepackaged meals, right? And so what happens is that you don't get to have really flavorful food, right? You're having high calorie food. You know, it's not a healthy balance, right? Because you're missing the time you spend to cook. Or maybe you're like super committed, you know, you're like, forget classes, I'm just gonna train. And you spend hours a day here, but you don't go take classes, you don't get, you know, private lessons, you don't get any information in. What are you actually doing? You're like repeating the same thing. That's like when I was an undergraduate in college, and you know I had like 2 spices total, and you know my kitchen was tiny, existent, and you're like, well, okay, I have Doritos and cheese. Okay, let's right. It's like that's you know I did not have enough ingredients there to prepare a nice. So you have to think of, am I missing that? And then finally, you know, you can have this problem where you're like, I'm getting information and I'm training. I'm getting information, I'm training. Getting information, training. What's the point? You know, if you see, every once in a while, you'll see some of these traveling professionals, and the good, like, some of them are just love what they're doing, and other ones are just like, don't touch me. And it's because they haven't actually gotten to spend time enjoying what they're doing. They're teaching and training and teaching and training and teaching and training, and they never got to like go out and enjoy the dance. So you can think of, okay, which of these, you know, I need a balance. Which of them am I actually spending my time on? Am I getting enough of each of these to have the full progression? So take a second. I don't know why I keep saying second when I mean milliseconds, but you get it. Try to write down, you know, it can be in a week or it can be in a month, however you want to think of the time frame. Write down how much time you actually think you spend in each of these categories. How much do you think getting new information, how much do you think you spend practicing, and how much do you think you spend going out and dancing on an average week or average month? And then ask yourself maybe, is there one of these categories that I think is lacking relative to the others? So, yeah, what I would actually say, sorry, let's go back to the slide I went to before. I will say that I think this becomes a little bit different in kind of a university setting like this, right? Where luckily there's, you guys have a lot of structure around being able to have all of these categories, right? Even in classes, where you go to the lecture and then you do homework, right? That's setting up this sort of structure. And ideally, if you can then go do an internship, you get the last part of the whole point of doing that. But kind of the academic setting is you go take your lecture, you do your homework, you go do your internship to learn the point of it, right? And you get all of this. By far, the biggest part that's lacking in general in Tango is this middle part. This is my belief. I would say way more than the other ones. And if you think of it, it's because of many of the settings what we have. We go, there's a pre-Malanga class, and then we go to the Malanga. We miss the practice. We have, a festival where that is stringing together 5 pre-Malanga classes and then way more Malangas, right? So we just triple down on it, right? And then we go to marathons, which is just eating a ton. And what I'll see is people who will spend a very large part of their finances and their time and their life doing Tango, but maybe they'll practice 1 hour a month, right? And they feel they don't know why they're not improving, and they think, I'm going to spend more time on it because I want to get better. And so they go spend twice as much time on these things, and it's twice as stressful on their life, but they don't actually spend any more time practicing. So this is, I would say, by far the biggest missing part in Tango in general. Kind of when you go out, outside of a college, university campus setting, is that most people, we miss this middle part. So if you can have one takeaway that I would say is the biggest thing that will shift how effective you are at spending your time, it would be that middle part is the one to remember to at least get some time. Okay, so now, next thing about kind of optimizing practice. So this is kind of a curve that we can think of in terms of what happens over time when we go to a class. So we do some sort of training, right? We learn something, we work on a move. Maybe there's an improvement, but then our body gets tired, right? So you actually have this little dip. By the end of the training, that's why you can't train for 12 hours straight, right? You get tired. But then your body learns it, so it becomes better. And then eventually it starts to forget the idea. If you go and ask most people to perform a move that they learned in a class a year ago, they will probably not be as good at that move as one day after the class, right? That is forgetting, okay? So you get this idea of you spend time training, you get tired, but then you learn something, you're better than you were before, and then we don't do anything, and you forget, and you get back to your baseline. So if you do this really well, and you stagger it exactly like this, you could spend a lot of time and money and never get anywhere. Because you could learn, and then forget, and then learn again, and forget, and learn again, and forget, and you could stagger your baseline for however long you want, right? But there's another way, right? The idea is, a single practice is very rarely going to lead to sustained long-term growth. So, next slide. What if we do this instead? We have a practice, we get tired, but then we learn. We take that new information and we do another training session, another practice. We get tired again, but we learn even more. It stacks on top of it. And then we keep writing up, right? It's like the tree rings, where each year you layer a little new ring, right? This is each practice session, we layer another ring on top, right? And we get bigger and bigger and bigger until we're a giant sequoia. The key here is less about how much you crank out in that individual training session, right? The key here is when you place the next training session. Okay? So the goal to being really effective and growing quickly is not that day. It is how you set this stuff from week to week to week, right? Where if I did these too close together, I'm already fatigued on that topic. My body doesn't want to accept new information. I just keep driving this down. If I move it too far out, I start forgetting and it becomes less effective. So what we want to think of, if we want to grow really quickly, if we want to be that person who, after a year or two, you dance with and somebody goes, I thought you danced for 12 years, right? It's not about how much you do in a given day. It's if you can structure so that you are growing at the right time each day. Does this make sense? So this I cannot stress enough, is we want to think not in terms of, am I getting better at this thing today? We want to think of, am I layering correctly so that I am getting the learning to stack on top of each other, and we scaffold our way up. Next slide. So, here's going to be my cue. If possible, right, this would be my rule for kind of the optimal practice frequency, something to think of. So, I don't know if you guys ever learned this about Monopoly. Monopoly is a game that we play really bad. You should crush your 8-year-old cousin in Monopoly, right? If you don't, you've done it wrong. Notice you get more money the more houses you have in your life. But it's not you add another house, you get a specific amount. Notice going to the first house, you get, say, $100. Going to the second house, you get $400. So going from 1 to 2 is not twice as much, it's 4 times as much, right? And going from 2 to 3, you got another $800, right? So 3 is not 50% more. It's again twice as much, right? You're getting, I don't know if I actually did, yeah, more than twice as much. So this is 3 times as much, this is more than twice as much, right? The idea is that when you went from 0 to 1, you got some amount, you're making money. 1 to 2, you're making even more. 2 to 3, you're making even more. But then 3 to 4, it's kind of like, okay, you're still getting something, but it's not nearly as much. And 4 to 5, it's like, okay, you kind of level it. So this is what I would say is the monopoly rule for training frequency, is that you have increasing returns to get up to 3. And then after that, you might get additional stuff, but it's not nearly as important. So if it's possible, you get a big bonus by hitting things 3 times a week. It's just the kind of the remembering and stacking to fatigue level, right, is really good if you can get at least 3 times. So, if we're thinking about we have some limited time, it's going to be much better to do consistent but short intervals than stack it all at once. What I mean by this is, say I only have 2 hours to actually practice, right? Well, instead of going once a week and doing that, maybe what I do is after a class, I spend 30 minutes and I practice what I just learned. That counts as a session, right? And then at home, I spend 30 minutes, like, say I watch a little video and then I try a step there, right? That counts as another session. And then I go out and practice for an hour and I leave that practice, not 2 hours, but 1 hour. There I spent 2 hours over the week, but I got my 3 sessions. That's gonna be really, really impactful. If you spend 2 hours a week, but space it out really well over 3 different times, and it could just be 30 minutes, 1 hour, you will grow quite quickly. I would say 2 to 3 hours a week of practice will get most people far beyond what they had set in their initial goals, right? But the idea is you want to be consistent and structure it so that you are riding that curve up, not stacking it all at once and then not doing it. The other thing, remember here, when I'm talking about, and this is where it can be hard, right? When I'm talking about practice, as much as we can, I'm talking about that cooking category. So what might happen is somebody's going to tell me, Sean, I do 6 days a week, right? I went to the festival, right? That's 3 days. I went to the Malanga twice a week. That's 5 days, right? And then I went to the next festival early. That's my 6 days. And I just repeat that. And I traveled from marathon to festival to marathon to festival to Malanga. Every night I'm out dancing. I do that 3 hours a week. That's, I'm spending a part-time job. I'm doing 25 hours a week. But they could get a lot more if they cut almost all of that out and just spent 2 hours consistently practicing, spaced out 3 times a week, right? So that's where time is going to be a constraint, but not all time spent is the same, right? Little practices, but consistent so that our brain's remembering it and building on top of it, right, is going to be very efficient. And just going out and dancing, forgetting the move, coming back a month later and being like, what was that move I tried? Let me spend 5 hours on it. That's not very efficient, right? So we could, to me, this would be if we're limited in time, if you can, space out little sessions, little micro sessions, 2-3 times a week. And that's going to be kind of the most bang for your buck. So, next thing is, how do we actually spend our time? This is the varying our difficulties. So I would say we have these 3 sections. We have how difficult something is, and I'm going to call this the accuracy and effort, right? How hard it feels, how precise I can be. If something's not very difficult, right, we have pretty high accuracy but very low effort. This is, you've been dancing for 5 years and you go take the beginner class and they do change of weight, right? You're like, okay, I've got this change of weight, but my mind's somewhere else, right? That's very low effort. And then, on the other side, here would be very low accuracy, very high effort. Is like, okay, you got the change of weight. Now let's do some sequence that has a bunch of colgadas and off-axis and then lift and then pose, right? And you're like, was it on the right foot or the left foot? I can't remember. That would be this, I would call it, the first one is like, if you missed, it was because you weren't even paying attention. Your mind's somewhere else. This one is, you didn't get it right and you don't even know what you didn't get right or why you didn't get it right, right? Here you should feel like, oh my God, I'm drinking from a fire hose, right? That's too hard. And the other one is like, okay, when's this gonna end? That's too easy. So the sweet spot, and you can vary here. I would say that this is the, kind of comfortably focused would be kind of the lower end of the sweet spot of like, okay, this is an interesting game. I feel like I'm getting it right, but I like what I'm doing. And then the upper end would be like, wow, I am fully engaged. If I get one thing wrong, I miss it. I'm missing maybe, half the time, but I know each time I didn't get it right? This is really hard, but I can do this. That would be kind of that upper end of the sweet spot. So it's this idea of high effort plus high accuracy. Okay? That is the target we're going for, where your mind is fully engaged, your body's fully engaged, if you do this for an hour, you should start to feel fatigue. Maybe not in your body, but in your head. You're like, I gotta take a break. Even after 20 minutes, this can be quite challenging. But you're getting the thing you needed, right? What your teacher told you, you're like, I have made improvements. I know that I am getting the accuracy. It's challenging, but I am progressing. And we're gonna vary that as you progress.
I'll also say this holds true for classes too. So we like to say choose your own adventure, where, like for example, today we had the box. If we're juggling a lot of different things and the full box is a lot, it's okay to strip that back to regular walking so that you can focus on different things. So finding that sweet spot in your practice and also in your learning is something we really encourage and empower you all to do.
This is my framing for how we can vary difficulty. I call it the difficulty balance. Like the old, I guess that's like the board for the DJ board almost.
Yeah.
So I'll split them into these two parts. We'll have like characteristics of a sequence and the variables that we can use to kind of dial them. So characteristics, I'll say we have familiarity. That is, do you know the step that you're trying, or have you just learned it? Complexity would be how long the step is, how challenging are the individual movements, how hard are they to string together. And accuracy is going to be something where it's like, what is the criteria for success? Is it just that I get the steps right, or do I have to like execute them precisely right, and if I get off balance a little bit, I'm going to count myself as that doesn't work, right? So those are going to be the characteristics. How precisely accurate are we going to be? How difficult is the move? How well do I know the move, right? That's going to determine one side of the effort. And on the other side, you have the timing of the move, right? Am I going to do this and not care about music, right? Can I just put some new age stuff that doesn't have a beat, and I'm just going to try how the movements themselves feel? Or maybe I'm going to get it just on the bass rhythms. Or maybe am I going to try to put this and capture the Biagi solo, right? Like that, those are variables of the timing. The partnering would be, am I going to lead or follow this with somebody, I know the movement, they know the movement, we're just going to work on the movements together to figure out how they connect? Is this, we're going to lead and follow, but we kind of both can help each other out? Is this lead and follow with somebody I've never met before, right? Those are different things, different complexities, right? And then finally, navigating will be like, okay, am I just going to get the sequence? Or maybe can I get it going in a line? Or can I get this sequence in the middle of the like when it's the most packed in the melodic? So those are differences. So the idea is we have all these different ways to vary the dials to find our sweet spot. Next slide. So for example, if I have the familiarity, right, can be very familiar, seeing the moves a few times, first time trying it. If it's the first time trying it, that itself is going to add a lot to effort, right? That's going to make it more difficult. Complexity would be, can I have small components of the movement, right? The full sequence, or maybe like linking that sequence into other ones. So maybe if I have something that I'm first time trying it, I dial this one way back. I just try individual components of a sequence, not try to get the whole thing, right? Or maybe I go, okay, we'll just count. If I get more steps right than wrong, that'll count. Or, do I have the correct sequence? Or is it going to be like, if I turn my toe like this, no, that's wrong, right? I need to have the right foot position throughout the whole move. So that the accuracy, right, we can get. And then timing is a huge one, right? Jackie and I change all the time. We have a lot of songs that don't really have beats, that we will do the movement not caring about the music. It's okay to not care about the music because you'll bring it back in, right? Then you have, okay, what is the rhythm? Am I getting it? And then can I do this movement? Have I mastered it so I can put it into the music? Similar, sometimes it's great to one of the best exercises you can do actually is you have a sequence, you're the follower does the sequence, and you just feel what they do. So you're not leading at all. You're just feeling how they move their body. And then you're like, okay, I got that. Now I can lead that, right? That's dialing down the part. Or, maybe on the other side, okay, we're gonna improvise and I'm gonna throw this in. And by the way, we've never danced before, right? That's the other extreme. And then finally, Prada Milonga versus no navigation. So what you want to think of with these dials is that you're going to build up your staircase to kind of ride that sweet spot up, right? You don't want to be too easy. You don't want to be too challenging. This is you don't want to start, you don't want to stay with the calf the whole time. You don't want to start with the bull. You want to have, as the cow grows, you are growing with it. And you kind of build up your staircase. So, you have a movement, the first time you learn it, dial as many of the other ones down as possible, right? As you get more familiar, you can start adding more back in. These things you can dial up your timing, your partnering, your navigating, right? You keep cranking things up to stay in that sweet spot where you're high effort, high accuracy. You're feeling challenged but not overwhelmed. Okay, so just to summarize, right? Here we're all gonna go win, the Olympic gold in this. You want to set your goals, right? You want to know, okay, what is my target? So that's your near-term and long-term goals. Have some abstract goals, what you really want, concrete goals, how do I get there? You gather your resources, right? So think of those tools that we have. Do you have the things that you need? Do you have the people you need? If not, that's okay, but don't pretend like it doesn't matter. Find a way to get what you need even though you don't have one of those components, right? And then this idea of the shot cookie, right? You get your information, you integrate the information, you dance, and enjoy. We want to choose our frequency. So the big thing, growth comes not from a single practice, but from linking practices together, okay? So that's, like this monopoly rule of training. If you can, 3 short practices. And I would say, to me, 20 minutes counts as a practice, right? Like if you got 20 minutes of actually thinking about tango and working on something, count that as a practice. If you could get 3 times of 20 minutes spread throughout the week, you've done your practice, right? Maybe if you bump that up to 30 minutes in each of those, that's great. An hour, that's great. If you could get 20 minutes of practice, that's 1 hour a week, and you've satisfied your cooking for tango, right? You've satisfied that. But if you're stacking all 3 hours once every other week, that doesn't count, right? That's you're not riding that curve up, right? That's one practice and then you forget, and then one practice and then you forget. So, try to get from linking practices. This will depend on the amount of time you have, but it's less time than you think you need if you space it out right. And then you want to progress your difficulty. So stay in your sweet spot, right? That's the high effort plus high accuracy. That's what you want to try to feel as much as possible. Unfortunately, it's also the most mentally demanding of anything you can do, right? If it's way overwhelming, you can check out. You're like, I'm not going to get this, I'm never going to get this, so that's on you. And if it's super easy, right, you can be like, okay, I've got this, there's no additional learning I need, that's fine. But that high effort and high accuracy is going to be, it's the most mentally draining thing you can do, so you want to sit in that as long as possible. That's going to give you as much progress. And we have these dials, of the familiar, complexity, accuracy, then timing, partnering, navigating. Think of how to vary those. That's kind of like the size of the bowl. How do you vary those so that it's not too heavy, not too light, so you keep progressing. And you just build your way up, you progressively get better and better. That's how you can grow very, very quickly.
I saw on the cooking side, it's like conditioning is one of the things that you can do. Do you have any quick suggestions
So, yeah, so conditioning's interesting. I started becoming the opinion that tango doesn't need a lot of conditioning in itself, but we need a lot of body awareness. So I would say that the biggest thing I would do is do exercises that require some sort of body awareness. So I don't know, like if you're going to the gym, instead of using the machine where you're just pushing out, use the barbell and you have to align everything, right? Or tons of tango dancers do yoga and Pilates, right? Because there's a lot of alignment you need to do those well. Yeah, I think things that allow you to feel how you move force through your body are really helpful. Things that help you find alignment in your body, coordination in your body, those things are really helpful. Yeah.
Maybe you can comment on one concept that you didn't mention, but I think is very important, is the feedback. So for example, when I practice, I think that's the general problem for tango. It's really hard to know if you're doing things right.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's a wonderful point. So okay, I'll give the one that we maybe don't think about, but is important to think about, is that there's spaces for feedback and there's spaces for not feedback. So if I am going out dancing in a milonga, that's probably not actually the time to give feedback. But if we're in a practice setting, that's a wonderful time to give feedback. And so the first thing, like before anything else, to ask is, do I have a space where feedback is encouraged? And am I going to a space where feedback is encouraged? So that's the first thing that I think we need to know. The second thing I would say is there's maybe two types of feedback that I think in my head. One is where kind of new information is provided, and the second is where you are getting feedback around how close to a target that you already know you're hitting. So if we're thinking of like playing darts, one is where is the bullseye, and the other is just how close did I get there. So actually, so maybe as an example would be is like if I'm a new dancer and I'm doing this, right? Jackie could give me the feedback of, oh, maybe don't move your arms so much, right? If I didn't know that was a thing, I thought that tango, was here, right? I didn't even know that was a target. So that would be a feedback that is new information. And then the other type of feedback would be, okay, I'm working on not moving my arms so much. Jackie, can you tell me when you feel this arm move? Right.
Oh. So I felt a move in the karate. And that actually brings us to the next point, if you want to address it, or I can, about how we can fit feedback to each other and to other people. So I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with Marshall Rosenberg and nonviolent communication. So basically, really good stuff for relationships, tango, and otherwise. But basically, in a nutshell, when we give feedback to each other, then we'll give it in the form of saying, hey, I noticed a very discrete X feeling in a very distinct moment. Perhaps we can find a way to smooth that out or whatever. So rather than being like, hey, you led that wrong, or be like, dude, can't you just follow? So rather than that, it's a very specific observation or insight in a very specific moment. Let's say it's the Molinete or in Osho, it's like specifically in something that we both know. And then we have a shared target or goal that we can both work towards. Because I don't know if it's me. Like maybe my pelvis is all wonk and that's what threw us off. Maybe it was Sean. Usually it's both of us. It's a little bit of both. And so in that way, it takes the problem or the observation away from being solely Sean's responsibility or my responsibility. And it's just something that we can both work on together.
Yeah, and just to, I think that's absolutely right? Like how you give feedback is super important. The other thing I will say is, especially if you're in a practice setting or working with a partner, it can be much easier to ask for that second type of feedback of how close on target am I. It's much easier to give that than the first type of new information, right? Because if I'm telling you how you should be, right, there's both a hierarchical thing and there's just a knowledge information of like, I need to know well enough what I'm talking about to tell you how you should change. Whereas if you came and asked, like, I am working on this step, how can I make it more comfortable? Or maybe I am working on this idea of softening this side of the embrace. Can you tell me when it feels stiff? That's a very easy thing for somebody to ask, right? There's no hierarchy, it's just their perception, right?
Which means that you can practice and gain useful feedback from anybody, regardless of what. So
Exactly.
even a total beginner can say like, hey, I feel a lot of tension on this side of the embrace in this particular moment. Maybe it's both of you, maybe it's one of you, but everybody can provide good feedback in practice.
So, yeah, there's a lot more on feedback. Yeah. Have us back and we can do another lecture. Feedback.
How do you know where to set that target when you ask somebody for feedback? Like, how do you pick that thing that you're gonna ask for feedback on?
Yeah, so this guy, shop, cook, eat. If we don't do this, you don't have stuff to cook, right? This is where you want to integrate your practicing with your knowledge, right? So basically, if you are feeling a lot like I don't know what to work on, that's what classes are for, right? If nothing else, just be like, we just learned a new step. I want to never forget that step so that a year from now I am better at that step. That could be something that you work on. And you spend the whole practice on the step that you just learned in the class last week, going over as much detail, as much variations, possibilities.
Followers, it can also be a concept like, oh, I want to feel fluidity in this very specific example. How do I feel fluidity in fast movement, for example? Then that's the way.
Thank you so much, everybody.